I am Henry Jeffries, and I'm a drinks writer based in Kent. Origin story. Wine. I went to Leeds University, studied English, didn't know what to do after graduating. I got a job in Oddbins, the local wine merchant, just because everyone looked like they were having a lot of fun there. I didn't really know anything about wine at all. But I like drinking wine, but I didn't really know anything about it. And I just picked up a love for wine in particular, but also other drinks there. Then I spent about 15 years working in publishing. I worked with Russell Brand on his Bookie Wook, which was quite an experience, as you can imagine. He's, well, not the easiest person to work with. But all the time, I really wanted to do stuff with drink. And I started a blog in 2010, I think, or 2011, called Henry's World of Booze, where I tried to write about wine mainly, but also culture and humor and stuff like that. And that did surprisingly well. And I did a book called Empire of Booze, which was about British history and drink. And then I gave up my job in 2015 in publishing, and I've just been writing about drink ever since. And I've done 2 cocktail books, and I've just published a book about English wine called Vines in a Cold Climate. So that brings us up to date. It was, yeah, I've not always been a big fan of English wine. In fact, I've always been quite critical of English wine. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I liked some of the sparkling wines. I generally thought the still wines were less good, and I'd rather have drunk something from France. Um, and I was asked in 2021 whether I wanted to do a book about English wine. And to be honest, I wasn't very keen at all. As I said, I wasn't a big fan of English wine. But more than that, I thought the English wine story was quite boring. I thought it was lots of city boys made a packet in the city, got a few million, bought some land in Sussex, planted Chardonnay and Pinot Noir with the aim to make England's answer to Paul Roget. And it just seemed like a very kind of repetitive story. And then I sort of, I was kind of flattered to have been asked to write the book. So I sort of did a bit of digging, and I went to this English wine lunch, and I sat next to a winemaker, and he was just full of stories about, people who hate each other in the industry, people who are a bit dodgy, people who make terrible wine, people who treat their employees badly. And I thought, you know what, there's a whole story here about conflict that people aren't picking up on. And there'd be lots of other books about English wine, like Oz Clarke did a very good book. Stephen Skelton's written a few books. Abby Moulton just did a book, but they were all kind of celebrations of English wine. And I thought, why don't I come at it from the other end and think, rather than celebrate it, look for how people aren't getting along. Look for the stories. Look who hates each other. And then once I realized that it was about these points of conflict and disagreement, then the whole book, it sort of started to make a lot more sense. So I went around the country, mainly Southern England, and just looked for, how aren't people getting along? What are people? And the great thing about English wine is it's a very small industry. So despite the fact there's quite a lot of money in it these days, it's not very PR'd. So if you go to Champagne and try and get someone from Moet to say something interesting, they're not going to do it because there's too much money involved. Or whiskey, like Scotch whiskey. No one ever says anything interesting in Scotch whiskey, or certainly not the big boys, because there's too much money involved. Whereas the English wine, it's very new, and it's full of all these big egos, these kind of men and women who are, interesting characters, and they all wanted to tell their side of the story. So sometimes I was just going along, like scribbling things down, going, I can't believe this person's saying this. This is absolutely scandalous. A lot of it had to be taken out. The lawyers got involved, and they not other people's lawyers, but a legal team read some of the book and just said, you can't say this. This is libelous. But still, a lot of it stayed in the book. So it was just so much more fun than I thought it was going to be. Initially, I just thought, don't want to do this. And as soon as I started, I was like, this is gold. Some of these stories are just brilliant. The research, I must say, the research was brilliant. It was all pretty much done from about February until September 2022, and the weather was, most of it was glorious. And I just drove around southern England, up into East Anglia, into the West Country, visited winemakers and drank wine and chatted, and it was just absolutely, it was wonderful. And some of the just getting the stories in the book were, it was such a joyful experience. And I kind of fell in love with English wine, which I didn't really expect to do either, because I've always been a skeptic. And I would just like, for example, going up to Essex and tasting some of the Pinot Noir or Chardonnay from Danbury Ridge. It was like, this is really, really exciting. So I think that was probably the best bit, like the research. And then I had like hundreds of hours of interviews, which I had to try and turn into a book. And that was the worst bit. That was awful. Just listening to these things and like writing them down and picking out the bits that were interesting. That was, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. I'll be completely honest. My editor was trying to take stuff out, and I was going, no, no, no. This is the gold. This is the, it's the characters. She'd be like, no, this gets in the way of the story. I'd stop and tell a funny story about one of the people in the book, or I would describe them. Sort of say, this person reminded me of, I don't know, this actor, or Basil Fawlty, or someone like that. And the editor was like, no, 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 this gets in the way of the narrative. And I was like, no, 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 this makes the book, because otherwise it's just a not very good version of Oz Clarke without the extra, without the funny stories. So I kind of, yeah, I don't think they sort of really realized what they were getting right up to publication. I still sort of don't quite think they know what they've got either, because they kept on describing it. Probably shouldn't say this either, but they kept on describing it as the definitive book about English wine. And I was like, no, no, it's definitely not the definitive book about English wine. It's my take. It's a very personal angle on English wine, and someone else could come at it, and I didn't visit, you know, a tenth of the producers I could have done. I just picked a few that I thought were interesting and told their stories. So I deliberately didn't try and make it comprehensive, because it would have just been impossible. So I deliberately, went with an angle and just went with it, rather than trying to get everybody in. I think lots of people were very amused that I didn't pull any punches at all, that I just put everything in. So I had a lot of kind of like wry emails from people saying, I can't believe you said that. And it wasn't like me saying it. It was like, I can't believe you let so and so say that. There was a bit of an argument between, I won't say who they are, but an owner of a wine estate and his head winemaker, and they fell out a bit over what the head winemaker had said. And I kind of explained that the estate came out of the book looking extremely good, and the fact that there was a bit of friction between them, I think, adds to the story. And actually, I think if the owner stepped back, he'll actually realize that having a leading role in the story of English wine is perhaps more important than everything sounding totally harmonious. I won't say the name of them, but there was a bit of, and I've had a few emails from people just saying, that was a bit near the knuckle. But on the whole, I had a great Stephen Skelton, who is the person who's the kind of expert on English wine, was so funny about it. He was just going, I can't believe the amount of swearing in the book. Because that was another thing. I thought it was really important that if people swear, don't asterisk it out. We're grown-ups. Just let them say rude words. So we left that in. So he was, but generally people have been very positive. And someone paid me a really big compliment. Charles Simpson from Simpson's Wines. I saw him recently, and he said, when I read other books about English wine, I think I know that. When I read yours, it was full of stuff I didn't know. So I thought that was, big compliment. I don't know about my favorite story, but I think the best thing in the book was I got to speak to Sandy and Stuart Moss from Nyetimber, and they were these Americans who founded Nyetimber, pretty much invented what we think of as English wine now, which is, champagne style sparkling wine. And they released their first wine in 96, 97, and just totally transformed what English wine was capable of. they left England in 2002, I think 2003, and they just went to California and sort of were never heard of again. And I got to interview there. A sort of mutual friend put me in touch, and I interviewed Stuart, and he was in his 80s. I said was because he died shortly afterwards, and he just told me all these brilliant stories. And you could tell that he just loved talking about it. They clearly hadn't talked about their experiences for years, and they just wanted to tell their side of the story. And if you go to Nyetimber these days, they don't really mention the Mosses very much, the people who founded it. It's all about like Henry VIII and, all this sort of stuff, because it's at this Tudor manor house in Sussex. But they don't really mention the Mosses. So I think they were really keen to tell their side of the story. So I interviewed both of them, and then I spoke to him, and we had a back and forth. And, and it was just so interesting hearing his side of the story. There was a bit where he was saying that he had this conversation with someone from the Ministry of Agriculture, the chap from this was when they were planting their vineyard, and they said they were going to plant Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and the chap from the Ministry of Agriculture who said you'd be much better off planting apples. And then Stuart said we didn't move 5,000 miles to plant apples. And so he told me all, and then he died. Just all of a sudden. He was old, but not, they didn't realize he was ill. So the book has his last comments on, you know, how he and his wife basically created modern English wine. So I think that's the bit that no one else can do. That's the bit that can't be replicated. So I'm, really proud. And just to have their story in the last time they told their story, the last time he told his story is, you know, I'm so proud of that. So pleased to have that in. Would I be able to do this book again? I think I probably would, because it's still quite small scale, and it's just full of kind of people with quite big egos who like talking about themselves. Let's be honest. And winemakers tend to be quite difficult people. It's a difficult job. It tends to attract quite difficult people, and English wine, 10 times that, because it's such a hard thing to do. And yeah, no, I don't think, I think they liked it. I think they liked the attention. So yeah, I think I could probably do it again. But other industries, if say for example, if I tried to do this about maybe some other drink, maybe beer, or I'm not sure, Scotch whiskey, no way. People would just close up or just say this has to be off the record. But wine, the English wine, wine's still very open. English wine is improving at such a rate that it's almost hard to keep track of. So the book was written in 2022, which is a very warm year, and tasting some of those 2022 wines, especially the ones that came out of Essex. There's a company called Lime Bay, tasting their 2022 rosé. It was like, this is so good. It was so ripe. Um, I think my views of English wine were stuck in about 2012. Great sparkling wines, still wines not so good. And I was tasting still wines, out of the barrel, and just the level of ripeness, kind of Chardonnays, Pinot Noirs. And it was like, something really, really exciting is going on. And I think, even since 2020, the standard has gone up extraordinary, a huge amount. So I was my view of English wine was totally, I wouldn't say totally turned on its head, because I still have a lot of reservations about it. I still think generally on price, the still wines can't compete. And they're probably never going to, because the yields, the amount of grapes you can get per acre is always going to be quite low in England. But I just, with so many of them, the quality is getting better and better each year. So that was, yeah, that I went in as a skeptic and came out, if not quite a evangelist, certainly someone who buys and drinks a lot more English wine than I used to. There's a one very, very close to me down the road, in about 5 miles down the road, called Westwell, and they make really nice wines. This is in Kent, near Ashford, And not only do they make very good sparkling wine, they also make really nice still wine from a German grape called Ortega, which tastes a bit like Vino Verde or Albarino or Muscadet. And I love the wines. The packaging is brilliant. I love the people who make them, Adrian and his wife Galia. I think they're really inspirational. The best thing about them is they don't charge that much for them. So by English standards, 15 quid is a bargain. And that's what they charge for their still wine, their Ortega. So I really love them. And then there's a producer in is Dorset the West Country, sort of, getting on for the West Country, called Langham. And I think their sparkling wines are the best in the country. I think they're absolutely remarkable. So I probably go for those two. The sort of future of English wine, like what are we going to be drinking? I think the things that are very established are the sparkling wines. I think most people, maybe not most people, but I think anyone who's even slightly interested in wine in England probably knows that Nyetimber or Ridgeview make very reliable sparkling wines that you can, you could, if you wanted to buy Moet or Paul Roger or something, you could buy Nyetimber. It's a bit cheaper. Quality is really, really good. What is next? What are the wines that are going to be as reliable as sparkling wine? So I think Chardonnay is definitely coming, especially from very dry places like Essex. I think that's going to happen. Rosé is getting better and better the whole time. Like English rosés used to be really thin and grassy and just really just really bad. I mean, I'll be honest, really bad. And they're getting better and better. And I think, and the great thing about rosé is people are prepared to spend money on rosé. So if you think about like Provence, people will, if it comes in like a fancy bottle, says Provence on, people will pay 20 quid for it, no problem. And if English, and I think English wine generally, the good stuff starts at about 16, 18, 20 pounds. So if England can get the packaging right, get the quality right, I think rosé is going to happen. So those are my two things. I think English Chardonnay and English Rosé. Rosé especially, I think that should be our forte. There is a hell of a lot happening behind the scenes. There's lots of people who put in lots of money and they're kind of realizing that they're not going to be able to keep going because the whole boom in English wine happened when interest rates were really, really low. So there were lots of people with lots of money who didn't know what to do with it. Now interest rates are sort of sky high, and money isn't cheap. You can't just borrow money cheaply to put into your venture. So there are quite a few big estates that are unofficially on the market for the right price. So people who made a lot of money in the city had this brilliant idea, and then they've just been like, I am burning through money. So I think you will get, well, for example, Hambledon has just been bought by Symington family, who are a port family in conjunction with Berry Brothers. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think we're going to see French multinationals, American companies, that kind of stuff coming in, and lots of consolidation. I think the mid-range people, a lot of them are going to be bought up just because it's really hard to make money out of. So I think there's going to be a lot of. I keep hearing all these rumors about people who are struggling financially, but nothing concrete. But I think there's going to be a lot of things changing hands, a lot of people trying to get out, but also a lot of people trying to get in, but just aware that you need deep pockets, really. To be honest, if I was doing it all again, I would have loved to have gone further north. There's vineyards in Yorkshire, Lincolnshire. I think there's there's even like some up in the borders, and I just didn't have time. I had a very tight deadline for the book. I'm based in Southeast England in Kent. I was working part-time. We can maybe go on to it in more detail, but writing the book was a terrible struggle financially. I've just done my taxes for that year and I earn almost nothing. I just don't know how we did it. And I just didn't have the time. But I would love to. And there's lots of stuff going on in Herefordshire, Worcestershire, the sort of Midlands. I'd love to have got more of that in. And so in the end, I just decided I'm going to do where 95% of the wine grown in England is made, which is Southeast England and Southwest England and a bit into East Anglia. And I'm just going to ignore the rest of the country because otherwise I wouldn't have got it done. So I just, I do feel, I do feel like I've missed out on something. So if I did the book again, there would be like a couple of chapters on the North and the Midlands, and as it is, I didn't do that. I have a day job, which is, who are wonderful, Master of Malt. They let me go down to 2 days a week to research the book, and I'm now back to 4 days a week. So that's my living, and then I do, I have a Substack. I do freelance journalism and stuff, but I'm really kind of really happy where I am. Actually, I don't have any big projects or plans yet, because the trouble with big projects and plans is they tend to take up a lot of time and don't make any money. So I'm, I'm quite happy just, bumbling along as I am. Well, you could go to your local bookshop, see if they've got it, order a copy, go to Amazon. Really don't mind, but it's should be quite easy to get hold of. So Henry Jeffries at substack.com, that's the best place. I'm on Twitter, though not as much as I was, I suppose, like everyone. Yeah, those are the best places to find me.